Like a business, Harry S. Truman once said, "You can accomplish anything in life, provided that you do not mind who gets the credit." Welcome to this week's episode of the Advisor Mentorship Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Hauser, and today we have a special guest on. He's a business consultant who has successfully helped manage the restructuring and sale of companies for 10x growth. We have a great entrepreneur, Rob Ferguson, CEO of Ferguson Alliance. How are we doing today, Rob?
Terrific, Jeremy. Great to see you.
Great to have you on as well. And I use the word great for a certain reason. Do you remember where that quote comes from with Harry Truman?
I believe I might have provided that during a workshop.
I believe you were accurate there. And one of the books you gave us was Good to Great by Jim Collins. So I know Mr. Kearns. I don't even know how long ago this was, probably 7 years ago now.
Yeah, the Mayflower Project.
Yeah, so it's always stuck out to me, especially, and I know we work with a lot of entrepreneurs. So for those that listen to the show, a lot of these advisors that work with InsureMark went through a transformation several years back, kind of a succession planning for Steve, but more so just getting the business more dialed in. And that's what we'll talk a little bit more about what Rob and his team did for our organization. So before getting too far ahead, so why don't you tell the audience a little bit about you, Rob, and then who is Ferguson Alliance?
Sure, happy to. I'll start with that quote. That quote was given to me by one of my mentors probably in the 1990s. I was a young rising star and a manager, I guess, had a very successful career. And like any young people that are doing exceedingly well and a high achiever, sometimes my ego got in the way a little bit. And so he was very polite and gently gave me that quote. And it still sits on my desk today. And as you know, I use that a lot in our workshops. So I started out working in just general management positions. My career ultimately took me to CEO of a public company and then also CEO of a 100-year-old family business with 17 cousins involved in that. I was the first non-family member CEO doing that. And I think it was 2010, I founded my advisory practice. We focus strictly on family businesses, privately held businesses, small middle market companies. Maybe the way to think about that size is, maybe 50 to 3,500 employees, 25 million in annual revenue to 500 million in annual revenue. That's kind of our target. I would say that we have a couple of businesses that are larger, and we have one or two that are probably a little smaller than that. So that's just a general guidance of what we work with on customer profile. And we help all these family businesses with their most difficult challenges. And those tend to be, they tend to be quite a few, but they tend to be alignment between family member shareholders, employees, and executive leaders. That, getting alignment is critically important. And then something that I know is defining a direction for the business. And so what we find is there really is an unstated direction, and that's why we have poor alignment. So that's one of the big buckets of challenges that we work on. As you mentioned with Mr. Cards, we do a lot of succession planning work where we help owners of family businesses hopefully get way out ahead of it, at least 10 years, and develop their succession plan and ultimate exit strategy. And then we also help, as you know, on strategic implementations. So we do some other practices as well, fractional CFO, things of that sort. But those are kind of our primary areas of helping family businesses.
It's fascinating, especially being really close to the source here, because going through this experience I was an honor to be asked by Steve to be a part of that group. And I learned just a lot from those couple of days of workshops with y'all's team, just really the baseline of running a business. And like it says in that book, Good to Great, getting the right people on the bus, you really harped on that, people. And actually something you just said there, it sounds more like, especially in family businesses, there's more of a good cop, bad cop. So you're kind of the bad cop that's coming in, if I hear that correctly, or as I've seen this kind of evolve.
I think maybe, as you know, we use a Socratic method. So as opposed to just coming in and laying down the law, so to speak, we help family members and employees and leadership teams self-discover, and it's a longer process. And so I think you can think of us as facilitators of transformation, facilitators of healthy conflict management, facilitators of clear communication. We teach people how to do those things as opposed to just coming in heavy-handed, because it doesn't do any good if we come in heavy-handed and tell everybody what to do, what not to do, and then we leave, and then everything just goes right back to the way it was. Then we have failed.
So, especially the organizations you work with. So, speaking to specifically probably the audience that listens to this, most of them are entrepreneurial. They're financial advisors. Some are maybe just one man operation, one woman operation, or they have one assistant. Some may have up to 12 to 15 people in their office. So what's it like to, I mean, how do you train or go in and coach a sales individual to become a CEO? Like, can you walk us a little through that journey of your experience of what's worked really well?
Yeah, that's a great question. And let me just share my philosophy on leadership. I don't think leadership is something you're born with. Maybe there's a prodigy out there. No, I'm not going to say there's not. But leadership is something that you learn. And you might remember we talked quite a bit about leadership agility. A lot of leaders and businesses today, whether they're small or large, are there because they were experts at something. They were an expert at sales. They were an expert in finance. They were an expert engineer. And that was their success model, being an expert. Well, that is a kind of an entry-level maturation place of leadership. To stretch or to increase your agility, well, the next level needs to be, the expert's not going to always, just because you're really good at sales doesn't mean you're going to know how to manage your working capital, let's say. Maybe that's a challenge for you. So you want to sell your way out of maybe a cash flow problem. And and you can't figure out, well, why is my cash flow problem getting worse? Why is it getting worse? I'm just selling more and I'm selling more. So they may not know how to do that. So they have to learn how to become a high achiever. And so to do that, they have to surround themselves, you talked about, with other folks that have other skill sets. And so my point being is leadership is like the evolution of a human being. When you're a baby, you know you can crawl, right? And then when you become a toddler, you can toddle, and then you can eventually ride a bike, and then eventually you get your driver's license, you can drive a car, and maybe now you're an adult, you can fly a plane. But that adult that knows how to fly a plane can still crawl if they need to, right? Well, that's leadership agility. You're an expert, then you're a high achiever, and then hopefully you can stretch your way into becoming a catalyst. And so it's having that agility in the different leadership situations. So an entrepreneur is going to be an expert and an achiever. Every entrepreneur that I know, they check those boxes. What they struggle with is, how do I become a catalyst where I can get things done with and through others? How can I cause things to happen versus me making the things to happen?
Yes.
And one of the things that entrepreneurs can really do to help themselves is get a mentor or two. It may be an informal advisory board. So these are trusted, knowledgeable folks that will break your echo chamber, because entrepreneurs are really great at telling themselves how great they are to keep moving forward. But then when they get to adversity, they want to tell themselves again how great they are so they can eventually get through it. And sometimes that doesn't happen, right? And so you need somebody in there to say, well, maybe you're not so great in this area. I know somebody who is, or I've got some ideas on how you might be able to overcome this challenge. And having that trusted advisory group, and again, it's very informal at the beginning stage, can really help an entrepreneur. And then as that business scales and as the entrepreneur gains additional leadership practices, then perhaps they may want to formalize that advisory board where they're meeting on a more frequent basis, helping that entrepreneur and his leadership team now that's scaled to be more accountable, helping them think through strategic initiatives. So it's evolutionary, I believe, in the maturation process of the business and the maturation process of the leader.
Rob, I want to unpack. You just unpacked that so well that I think the people that are listening to this, I hope they wrote down some of those notes. One thing that really sticks out to me is what I'll see amongst some advisors is because it is the evolution of the human being. I love that quote. So as time goes on, you just continue to just work on yourself. And as you continue to advance and become the person you're supposed to become, all of a sudden things start to make sense and you figure out what you're not good at and delegate out. So when's the right time for, if we're speaking specifically to the small business owner, entrepreneur, to where like, I keep coming across this, but maybe I'm not ready to start delegating, or this is for sure. My tank is empty. I need to be looking at stuff like this. How do you know as a business owner when the right time is?
I get asked that question all the time. I said, if you're asking that question, you're too late.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
the sooner the better, right? I mean, you need some outside perspectives, but it's got to be from qualified individuals. Your barber's not going to be the best person, right? That's not going to work. Or your neighbor who's a banker that you socialize with all the time. That's probably not the best person. You really want to find an advisor or two that are knowledgeable and experts in areas that you're not and that you're struggling with. That's, to me, is key. So I would start right away, even before you launch the business. I mean, I know you have a lot of sales agencies here right now, and I'd be trying to align myself with somebody who's accomplished something I want to accomplish. I want to go from just being a single agent to I want to have, I don't know, 15 or 20 agents underneath me. Well, who's done that before, and how can I learn from them? That's what I would be seeking that out. And that's maybe on the growth of that particular business because they know the industry. But then what about the business of business? And so, well, who's really good? Who's experienced? Who's taken businesses, from $0 to $30 million, or $30 million to $300 million, or $300 million to $3 billion? Who do I know that has a servant leadership attitude, wants to be a mentor, that can come in and help teach me some of these interesting and best practices?
No, that's fantastic advice. And I know since you work with so many people over your career, what are some of the common challenges, especially as your team goes in and you help these groups? You leave, like you said, it's all about the execution afterwards. So they're all jacked up, ready to get going. So what are some of the challenges you see majority of those businesses go through within, let's say, the first year that your team has helped them overcome?
I think the very first one is what we've been talking about is the leader being open and being vulnerable to change. You might remember we talked about in the workshop, we reserve the right to be smarter every day.
Yes.
And we repeat that quite a bit. And the reason is because everything's a learning moment. If we can help these owners and their leadership team actually come from a point of curiosity, just be curious about doing it different. Be open, consider it possible. And if it was possible, what other possibilities could come? So that's our first big challenge, is just opening up to change. And then the second big challenge is teaching the owner and his leadership team how to lead his teams through change. Change is an external issue. It's an external event, but how we transition through that change is internal. And there's 4 distinct stages to go through that. And leaders have to help others get through those transitional stages in order to accept and implement change, because change is happening so fast. And that's where we see our second big challenge is unwillingness to adapt to change. And if you don't, and I know you've experienced that, right? I mean, it's just normal and natural. But when the brakes are put on, I'm not going to change this because this is the way I've always done it. This is the way I did it back in the 1980s, and that's the way we're going to be. Well, you're going to stay back in the 1980s, and
Hypothetically.
you're not going to be relevant, right? You have to learn how to change and how to lead change. So that's the second one, and the third big challenge is how to communicate. It's one thing to be open and vulnerable to change, another thing to lead yourself and lead others through change. But then thirdly, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here with you, Jeremy, but communication has to be clear, direct, and transparent. It's really hard to get alignment in your organization if people don't know where you're going. And if your employees don't know, well, how are we tracking? Then how can they help if you're off track? Or how can they help do more if you're exceeding? So those would be the primary elements of challenges when we first come into a business that we have to deal with our family ownership and leadership.
And I mean, we just go inside the hood a little bit, because I mean, we spend, I think, you probably know better than me, at least half of one day just trying to figure out the vision. Going to what you're saying is, as an organization, just the basics of vision, mission, and getting people excited. And so what are your thoughts on possibly changing that over time? Or is that something that's supposed to live forever, ideally?
Great question. Well, you might remember that we have this, we call it the alignment triangle. And at the very top of the triangle is the most aspirational hopes and dreams that an organization has. And that's your values and vision. And we say, well, that should probably be out there for at least 10 plus years, right? But then as you walk down that triangle and you get to your mission, so if your vision is your big dream, it answers the question of why are we? Mm-hmm. Then the mission says, okay, well, what do we have to have in order to become that type of a company? Well, we think, and in a fast moving business like most of your listeners are in, that mission is probably 3 years, maybe, could be 5 years. But it really just says, okay, well, if I really want to become this, these are the three things I've got to have in order to become that. And then from that becomes your strategic intents and your SMART goals that we've talked about. And then you develop your plan, and then you execute. So I do think the one area that should be everlasting are the core values. Okay, now, so the values of an organization, that's kind of the operating ethos of who we are, and how we operate, how we communicate, and how we talk. But I'm going to say core values, those are the values that give you your competitive edge. It really is how you're different from everybody else. And I know that you have a lot of agencies out there. There's a lot of people competing for that consumer to get that insurance product to them. So it's the values, and there's usually 2 to 3 very specific core values that is distinctively different and gives you that competitive edge. Then you have your values of kind of, I'll call them values for you must have to be an employee, right? Mm-hmm. As honesty, trustworthiness, integrity. I mean, nobody wants employees that don't have those. So those are kind of your must have. And then certainly you've got aspirational values, and then you even maybe have some accidental values that happen over time. But I think the core values are critical to help any organization maintain that competitive edge, because it really and truly, when organizations go to, say, sell, that's one of the primary drivers of the multiple is, well, what's that company's values, and can they live longer than the owner?
Would you say, especially a lot of the listeners who they build their own empire as an advisor, and then they start to add some people along the way. Now a team's been grown for 10 years, 15, 20 years, and they do want an exit strategy. So how do you build a business forever? Is it more
Yeah.
to what you're saying, leaning towards the core values over the vision? Or, I mean, they're all important, but how do you build a business forever?
Yeah. So to me, the secret sauce is learning how to balance structure with flexibility. Let me say more on that. Entrepreneurs, particularly entrepreneurs in your business that are selling organizations, have extreme flexibility, right? I mean, they'll take risk, they'll move fast with sense of urgency, they get things done, high achievers. That's great. And that's really good when it's just one person, right? But then when you start bringing on two people and an admin and three or four, now you have to put some structure in place. You have to pay the people, so you have to have some sort of payroll process. That's the structure. And Jeremy, structure is not a natural skill set of salespeople.
No.
But the point being is, if you can reach this prime state where structure and flexibility are in equilibrium as best they can, now you can live forever, to speak. And because think about it, if you let structure overwhelm flexibility, too many rules in the business, what happens? Your revenue starts going backwards. You start taking less risk, right? All of a sudden, you become more bureaucratic. And we see that a lot of times when businesses get to a threshold and then they start hiring a lot of administrative staff. They get top heavy, and then there's too many rules and too many policies. And now you've lost that entrepreneurial spirit. Similarly, if the flexibility overwhelms structure, what happens? Your revenue may be growing, but your profits are declining because there wasn't enough structure and discipline to manage and control costs at the same rate as the revenue. Anyway, that to me is, and if anybody's interested in learning more about that, they can give us a call but that to me is what's really important.
Well, I mean, one of the not necessarily, I wouldn't say fears, but that's the only word I just keep thinking of. The uncertainties of a business owner. Basically, it's their greatest asset is their business, and giving away the keys to the kingdom, or possibly looking at opportunities to where for the business to live forever, they have to give up the trust. They have to trust somebody to take care of basically their living child for eternity. So there's a huge fear between what you just said there, between flexibility or structure with flexibility. So how do you make sure your consumers as a business owner are not going to be affected by that? And what are some of the key things advisors specifically should be looking at when they're entertaining those type of opportunities for them, so their customers aren't the ones that are getting too heavy on one side or the other of structure and flexibility?
Well, there's a lot there. Let me say,
Yeah.
first of all, the owner needs to realize what their location is in the wheel of business. And if you think about a wheel and there's a hub in the middle of this wheel with spokes running out to the rim. If the leader is in that hub, all decisions come through that hub. The leader's controlling everything from what's the coffee vendor we use, what's the bank we use, to are we going to sell to this person or not. That's a problem. That is an unscalable business because you only have one leader. And if that leader wants to exit, let's say, well, if you pull her or him out of the center of that hub, there is no business. And so that's the first breakthrough element, is getting the leader to understand that. But then secondly, well, then how do you build a hub that's not dependent on the leader? And those are all the series of workshops that you all went through many, many, many years ago. And so it can be a self-sustaining, self-managed business without the leader having to be in the hub. But let me say something about our leaders and our owners. You're right that our research on our clients over the last, I don't know, almost 15 years now, is that 85% of their net worth is in their business. Yeah, that's a big deal. And it's interesting to me that these business owners will hire a wealth advisor to help them manage the 15 or 20% of net worth, but they're reluctant to hire maybe a business advisor or a mentor or a consultant to help them work on 85% of the net worth. So I just put that out there. Maybe even some of your agencies have clients that are that way. And so it's really important to think about that. But what I really want to go to is bigger than that, bigger than the net worth issue it's kind of a hindrance for an owner to exit. What I learned is the single biggest reason is that owner identity is the business. And so they're selling their identity. And that's not true. But the owner has to realize that and learn that their purpose and their self-worth is much more than their business. Yeah, they're the founder of it. But that's what we have to teach our owners is, yeah, you're not selling your identity. You're not selling your purpose. Yeah, there's a new purpose out there, but your identity is much bigger than the founder, the president, or the CEO of ABC firm. You're a father, a grandfather, whatever, you're a community leader. There's so much more out there. But most of our entrepreneurs at the end of it, I was just with a client last week and he was with his 3 adult children. We're going through succession planning. He had to say, hey guys, you got to understand, I'm selling my soul. I mean, that's how he felt.
That's a big sentence.
My sentence, my business is my soul. And of course the kids were there. They finally got it. And then they said, well, no, you're not. I mean, you're so much more than the leader of this business. We don't even think of you as the leader of the business. This is what you do for your grandkids and us. And he's very active in the community, and he's a big community leader. So anyway, my point being is as every business owner should plan for their succession as soon as they start their business. They need to be thinking about that. The more time you have, the more options you have. And then every business owner needs to be working on their whole balance of life, not just their business, and realize there's always a greater purpose out there than just the business.
I think that leads into a great timing of where our conversation is today, because we're actually, especially amongst advisors, so some started in October, some will start in November, and they're doing business planning for 2025. So, I mean, if they've been hanging on here and they've been listening, writing down a lot of good nuggets of what you've just laid out as you've done this with multiple businesses. What are some tips for advisors that when they're doing their business planning for 2025 to at least get the ball moving in the right direction? What should they be looking out for and looking into for 2025 as financial advisors?
Build a plan with the future in mind. I see too many business owners do their planning based on what happened. So think about this, and where you're driving a car, think about the proportional ratio of the windshield to the rear view mirror.
Yep.
And how difficult would it be to drive the car forward, always looking in the rear view mirror? Mm-hmm. It'd be impossible. So the biggest mistake that I see is, the owner's going to say to their bookkeeper or to their staff, well, whatever we did last year, bump it up 15%.
Yeah, very true.
Well, there's no thoughtfulness in there. You need to start with the end in mind. Well, where am I headed? Where do I want to be in the next 5 to 7 years? What do I have to have in order to get there? And now let's budget what I'm going to do this year to make progress on it. So to me, that is the biggest tip that I can give. And then just recognize that your plan is going to be out of date on January 2nd. Mm-hmm. So the plan, because as you just said, you're working on your plan in October and November. And in October and November, you're trying to figure out, well, what am I going to do in December of next year? Well, we don't know, but at least it gives you and your organization the guide rails some direction to help benchmark your journey, so to speak, with milestones. But be flexible with that plan as you're going through there. That's the structure is the budget, and the flexibility is the decision making to adapt to changing situations.
And I mean, we went through this experience. Ours was a 5-year vision or a 5-year plan.
Yeah.
So in today's world, how fast, because this was back in either 17 or 8, I really don't remember. It was around 2017 or so. And so today with technology and all the things that have evolved over the last, call it 7, 8 years.
Yeah.
I mean, is a 5-year plan, is that still sustainable of a vision of a goal, or is it more so a 3-year plan as a check back and look back?
Yeah, so I think it's a 3 to 5 year plan. I do think for the business that in the industry that you're in, and my goodness, it just seems like change is happening multiple times a day sometimes.
Yeah.
So I would say having a 3-year plan that's pretty well thought out is a good idea. But remember that plan has to get granulated down to a 12-month plan and then to kind of a monthly plan. So, and that becomes your budget, so to speak, is that 1-year plan. But the 3 to 5 year plan is kind of your, this is the financial model of my business. If I can achieve these things, this is how the shape of my financial model of this business in the next 3 years will look. But now here's my budget for 2025, and that's going to get us closer to where I want to be in the next 3 to 5 years.
And a handful of the advisors, so they're kind of going through this with us. They're starting to do the waterfall report. So ladies and gentlemen, this is the waterfall guy. So, and that's where you're leading and talking to, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's exactly right. And as you use that waterfall tool, right, we set our plan 13, 14 months ago, but how well are we doing now on our forecasting capabilities based on the current situation as it goes? And so that's, again, balancing structure with flexibility, right? That's the whole idea. That's a great example. And it's one of many tools that we use to help keep that balance.
This has been incredible. Last question for the last question. Just because I do have some advisors that come across this, and I know you have a lot of experience with this. You already talked about it earlier on. So what are some tips for advisors who do have family offices and have people amongst their family? How do they get out of their own way? I mean, all entrepreneurs, they love change, right? Or no, they don't. Leaders don't usually love change. So how do those individuals work best practices around family offices and being able to still go home at night and not be viewed as the boss, for say?
Really great question, and that could take several hours here, but let me try to do my best to summarize it. Let me visualize this teeter-totter. Okay, on one end of the teeter-totter, you have family needs and wants. And on the other end of the teeter-totter, you've got business requirements and opportunities. So you're constantly balancing that, right? And so what's the fulcrum in the center that helps you keep that balance? Well, it's how are you going to control the business with policies, process? What's your conflict resolution methodology, your culture, your system for managing, all of those things? That's what keeps it in balance. It is impossible, in my opinion, because in many ways, I guess I'm a family business too, right? My practice, it's impossible to just compartmentalize it, but recognize that it is there and that it needs to be kept in the best balance as you can. And the way to do it, what we help our family businesses do, the larger ones, is we help them craft a family constitution. And that describes and explains, well, how are we going to do this? How are we going to balance that teeter-totter? And how are we going to pass our business along from one generation to the next generation? How is my 3-year-old grandson and my 7-year-old granddaughter eventually going to become an employee if they want into the business? What are the qualifications? So we establish all that up front as early and as many generations early as possible, because then everyone knows, okay, well, these are the rules. This is how we're going to control decisions and how family members can or cannot enter the family business, so to speak. So, but it is a balancing act. There's no doubt about it. And I think the owner, the leader, needs to have great self-awareness about that. And there's times that the business can suck up all of your time, and you have to
Right.
have extreme discipline to just say, all right, I've put my 12 hours in. I'm cutting it off now, and now's my time to go be with the family. And you leave the cell phone turned off, and you know, whatever it is, and you do the things that you do with family to help, you know, grow that side of your wheel of life, so to speak.
Yes. Is that more so, do you find it better to have a good EA, executive assistant, to help with that? Or is that, I mean, you have to lean on somebody, right?
Yeah, you're right. Oh, definitely. And I think also build processes. Lean on your processes. Lean on your team. Delegate. Learn to delegate. In other words, the quicker that owner can pull themselves out of the hub of the wheel, the more balance in life they're going to have. There's just no doubt. But if you remain in the center hub of that wheel, it's impossible to get balance because everything's coming to you and everything's going out from you. So you move yourself from the hub of that wheel, you will immediately pick up more balance in your life. But you've got to build the operating systems, the best practices, the policies and procedures. And we didn't go too far in it, but you got to get the right people in there in the center of the hub. So between the people and the processes and policies, now you've got a self-operating hub that's no longer dependent on you, the owner. And now you can think about the business in a bigger set of terms, and you can spend more time with what really matters in life is your family.
Yeah. And that's great advice. And if y'all haven't already read it, is there a newer book that you're going towards or telling people to read? Good to Great with Jim Collins back several years ago. Is that still the book you recommend going into new businesses that you do?
Yeah, it is. It's a really good book. There's several others out there. I like the author Patrick Leoncini. I love the way how he writes. He has a book that's out called The Advantage. It came out a couple of years ago. I highly recommend that book as well to give some ideas and guidance. But he writes some really good ones. The one book that I think is appropriate for growing teams is his book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. That would be the second one of his that I would certainly recommend. But there's good books out there. Just be careful. You don't want to become that leader that's, the book of the month club that every time the leader reads the book, then he passes them out to all the employees, and then you just get all this confusion as to what's going on. I'm looking at the bookshelf I'm here in my office. I don't know. I probably have hundreds of leadership and management books, and generally they all say the same thing.
Right.
They just said it in a different way. And I go all the way back to the Tom Peters days in the 1980s in Search of Excellence. And then I read books today. It's all still saying some of the same things.
And the good thing is now we got Audible books. So, when you're working out, driving, you're knocking out chapters.
Yeah. Yeah. And you got podcasts. You got great little podcasts like this. So you can learn something maybe in, 30 minutes or so. So, yeah, it's good.
Being efficient. So I appreciate your time. Is there, as we're wrapping up, any final words of wisdom from Mr. Rob?
Okay. I'll leave your listeners with this. Take a serious look at answering this question. And that question is, are you a family first business or a business first family? And if you can answer that question, then define what a business first family is versus a family first business. And then let that be the cornerstone of how you go about leading and managing your business for the future.
Very good. I have so many notes from this one. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Good seeing you, Jeremy.
No, this has been great. Thank you for your time, Rob. Thank you so much to the listener for tuning in to this week's episode of the Advisor Mentorship Podcast. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite listening device so you do not miss out on any future episodes. Connect with us on LinkedIn at Jeremy Hauser, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel at Jeremy Hauser AMP. And as you share this episode with a friend or a colleague, just remember, in a world full of betas, be an alpha.